In today's episode, we're going to step off the streets and inside the home of an ordinary Chicago family in the 1930s. We're going to examine the hidden signs of the era, those quiet, everyday details that might seem invisible at first glance, but actually tell a massive story. Take a look at that table. You see a loaf of factory-sliced bread, which was still a modern marvel of the era, sitting next to bowls that have been scraped completely clean. And this brings us to the first hidden mark of the times. If you look closely at the wrapper, you will see the words, "Soft Twist Sliced A&P Bread." A lot of folks today might not remember, but A&P, the great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, was an absolute American icon. For much of the 20th century, it reigned as a massive retail empire, serving as the largest grocery retailer in the United States from 1915 all the way through 1975. At its absolute peak in 1930, A&P operated nearly 16,000 stores and captured roughly 10% of all U.S. grocery spending. Because of their sheer volume, they could buy food directly from the farmers, completely cutting out the middlemen. They ran a strict cash and carry business, meaning no credit and no delivery. For millions of working-class Chicagoans, walking into those familiar red front corporate stores was the only reason there was food on the table at all. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest, it was cheap, and it literally kept an entire generation of Americans alive. Now, let's shift our focus to this classic cast-iron cook stove. This wasn't just a stove, it was the absolute beating heart of a 1930s home. A heavy cast-iron workhorse that burned wood or coal. If you watched the first episode of our 5-part series, you might remember the footage we looked at of women scavenging for broken wooden crates down at the South Water Market. Well, this is exactly why they were doing it. They were hunting for anything that would burn just to feed a stove exactly like this one. Long before modern gas ranges took over, our mothers and grandmothers woke up in the freezing dark before dawn just to stoke these ashes. It heated the kitchen, it baked the bread, and it boiled the water for the weekly wash. It took back-breaking daily labor to keep it running, but during those bitter, unforgiving Chicago winters, that iron stove was the only thing keeping the freeze at bay. Now, let's take a look at how an everyday Chicagoan's home was set up. And right off the bat, notice the steamer trunk. For a lot of Chicago families, especially those who made the trek from out of state or came across the Atlantic from Europe, a trunk like this took the place of a proper closet. It held the things that mattered most, their Sunday best, the good linens, and whatever few family keepsakes they had to their name. Living through the Great Depression meant playing by a tough set of rules, and every square foot counted. Space was at an absolute premium. A simple metal frame bed, like the one you see in the next room, often meant 2, maybe even 3 kids sleeping head to toe. Cracked plaster on the walls? That was just a fact of life. It wasn't just because nobody had the money for repairs. It was the constant rattling from the streetcars and the heavy rumble of the L train passing by. But despite the empty pockets and the cramped quarters, these walls held something a whole lot bigger. Official documents, like those City of Chicago birth certificates, were treated like gold, proudly displayed right up there with the family photos. For new Americans, a piece of paper like that wasn't just a municipal record. It was rock-solid proof they belonged here. It was a ticket to a steadier future for their kids. If you want to understand the true weight of the Great Depression, you don't just look at the stock market tickers or the breadlines. You look at the birth rates. By 1934, the American cradle was growing quiet. The birth rate across the country had plummeted to historic lows, a record that wouldn't be broken for decades. Back then, bringing a baby into the world wasn't just a family milestone. It was an act of absolute faith. When you're stretching every nickel just to keep milk on the table and coal in the stove, a new mouth to feed was a terrifying financial gamble. Millions of young couples simply chose to wait, delaying marriage and putting off starting families out of sheer survival. The kids who were born in Chicago in 1934, part of what historians call the silent generation, grew up in the shadow of scarcity. They learned the value of a dollar before they even knew how to read. They were infants during the worst of the Depression, school children during World War II, and the very people who built the backbone of post-war America in the 1950s. So, when you look at 4 birth certificates pinned to a wall in a cramped Chicago flat, you're not just looking at a big family. You're looking at defiance. You're looking at a mother and a father who looked at one of the darkest eras in American history and decided that life was still worth carrying on. Look out any Chicago window back then, and you'd see a sight that's hard to find on an American street today. Now, on paper, the birth rates were hitting rock bottom compared to the generation before. But compared to the quiet neighborhoods of the 21st century, these streets were absolutely teeming with life. With no money for organized camps, structured sports, or fancy toys, the asphalt and the dirt lots were the local playground. The city was a kids' stadium. You'd see them out there playing stickball with an old broom handle and a taped-up rubber ball, or huddled in a circle over a fierce game of marbles in the dirt. They played kick the can, ring alivio, and hide and seek until the streetlights flickered on. Chicago's famous brick alleys became a whole secondary world where kids ruled. They turned wooden crates into soapbox racers, scavenged for scrap metal, and made up games out of thin air using whatever junk they could find. Parents didn't hover back then. The rule was simple: be home when the dinner bell rings or when the sun goes down. It was a tough, free-range kind of childhood born out of necessity. There might not have been much money in the bank, but a kid growing up on a Chicago block in the 1930s was never, ever lonely. But now, let's step outside these cramped apartments and take a look at what the men were up to in the 1930s. Take a closer look at that card game on the pavement. In the 1930s, you could find a match like this on almost every single block in Chicago. But these men weren't looking to get rich. Nobody had a dime to lose anyway. They were playing for something far more valuable: their sanity. In those days, a man's entire worth was measured by his ability to provide. To sit at home, trapped under the silent, worried gaze of a wife and hungry children, was a suffocating kind of shame. So they took to the streets. A worn-out deck of cards and a cardboard box became a makeshift sanctuary. Focus on the hand you're dealt, bluff your neighbor, and for an hour or two, the unpaid rent and the closed factory gates faded into the background. It was a psychological shield against a reality that was too brutal to face 24 hours a day. More than that, it was an unspoken pact. Sitting there, shoulder to shoulder with men who were just as broke and just as desperate, a man realized he wasn't a personal failure, the system was. There is also a detail that immediately strikes a modern viewer as profound. Almost every single one of them is wearing a suit, a collared shirt, and a structured hat, whether it's a working man's flat cap or a wool fedora. To the modern eye, it looks like formality, but in the 1930s, a suit wasn't a luxury, it was a man's armor against absolute despair. Even at the lowest point of the Depression, leaving your home without a jacket and a hat was considered a public surrender to poverty. It was the unwritten rule of the American sidewalk. These garments were often the last valuable possessions these men owned, meticulously brushed and pressed to hide the threadbare cuffs. Looking employable, looking respectable, was the only psychological currency they had left to spend. These men, standing shoulder to shoulder in their worn suits, fedoras, and flat caps, represent millions of Americans whose lives were turned upside down almost overnight. By 1933, unemployment in Chicago had soared above 40%. Factories that once roared with production now stood silent. Men who had once provided for their families now waited in long bread lines, hoping for a simple meal or a chance at work. Look closely at their faces. These are not criminals or vagrants. These are former steelworkers, meat packers, railroad men, and small business owners, the very backbone of America's industrial might. Many had fought in the Great War just 15 years earlier. Now they stood quietly, cigarettes in hand, waiting for relief that often never came. Even the underworld felt the crisis. Al Capone, Chicago's most infamous gangster, opened his own soup kitchen in 1930, serving thousands of hot meals a day to the unemployed. It was a strange and bitter irony, one of the city's most wanted men feeding the very people the system had abandoned. Yet amid the hardship, there remained a quiet dignity. These men still wore their hats and ties. The same streets that saw bread lines by day came alive at night with neon lights, jazz clubs, and the dangerous glamour of the Prohibition era. This is the Chicago that shaped the greatest generation. Men who endured the worst economic collapse in American history, only to rise again and save the world in the greatest war humanity had ever known. What you're watching is not just old film. It is a window into the soul of a city and a nation that refused to break. What we see here is one of the government's surplus commodities distribution stores, store number 12, where in the depths of the Great Depression, American families received free surplus food, flour, potatoes, beans, and other essentials that farmers could not sell. For millions of people who had never asked for help in their lives, these stores became a quiet lifeline during the hardest years of the 1930s. And yet, despite everything you've seen, the lines, the hardship, the quiet struggle, Chicago in the 1930s was still a city full of life. Walk down any street and you would hear the laughter of children playing stickball with a broom handle and a rubber ball. You would smell fresh bread baking in tenement kitchens, hear radios playing swing music through open windows, and see neighbors helping neighbors. People still fell in love, got married, had babies, and dreamed of better days. The movie theaters were packed, the jazz clubs were alive, and on hot summer nights, families would sit on their front stoops, sharing stories and hoping for tomorrow. This was the real Chicago, not just a city in crisis, but a city of resilient hearts. A place where ordinary men and women refused to let the Depression define them. They worked when they could, helped when they could, and kept moving forward. These were the same streets that would soon send its sons to fight in the greatest war the world had ever seen. And they would carry with them the toughness, the humor, and the unbreakable spirit forged right here in the 1930s. In our next chapter, we're going to step even deeper into the heart of this era. We'll explore the secrets of childhood on the streets of 1930s Chicago, what it was really like to grow up in those years, the games they played, the lessons they learned, and the world they saw through a child's eyes. If what you've seen today moved you, inspired you, or brought back memories, please subscribe, leave a comment, and let us know. We love hearing from you. Your stories make this journey even more meaningful. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next part.